Hello and welcome back, and that's right, it's time to look at another DIY NAS case. For those of you that are getting stuck in the woods and surrounded by all of these different unknown, unbranded DIY cases because you want to build your very own version of one of those, but you don't want to pay them for the privilege of underpowered hardware, no doubt. But this is the U-NAS NSC-810A, their newer generation 8-bay device. That A, it means that this supports ATX. It supports micro ATX and micro ATX MoBos inside, and although it does it in a slightly different way to a number of other 8-bay devices, 8-bay cases I should say, on the market, this does do it for about 2 to 250 NICA depending on where you shop from. Obviously the obvious one is Aliexpress, but you can get hold of U-NAS enclosures on Amazon and a bunch of other retailers as well. They're not just limited to the Ali crowd. Now, U-NAS themselves, this isn't the first case from them we talked about. We also talked about their 4-bay, hopefully that video's live. And their 4-bay case there, the 410, utilised the micro ITX boards on its own. And I did praise the brand for, one, having lots of decent online resources, manuals and response times to their support section very, very quickly from everything I could see online. Although their cases seem to be a pinch higher than very, very similar cases with other brand names attached to them, I will say they do seem to put quite a lot of love and care behind it. They even have a lot of their own pre-populated NAS solutions with their own OS as well, which we might look at one of these days. But at the moment, on their own official website, this knocks around for $219. You can also get one with a PSU included, a 350 watt PSU, and that comes in at $329. So you know, about $90 for that PSU for 250 watts, which is so I will say. I mean, without knowing if that is going to be like an 80 plus rating one, I'm not too sure about it, but at the very least you can get the case on its own for $219 on their website. And again, I've seen pricing differ from $199 all the way up to $249 depending on different retailers you look at there. So let's look what we get for our money. That was a dull box, wasn't it? Yep, it's got their name there on the top, but that's really it. If we have a little look inside, this quite brown generic box there, we can have a little look what we get inside. We have got our box of accessories, and we've got a very well protected box, which somehow I was able to lift out of there without ruining everything. So we'll get to that. Quite good protection there, and that's gone like that black, slightly softer foam. Now inside we've got some accessories to talk about. We have got the OS SSD plate. This is where you've got a 2.5 inch SATA living on top there. On top of that, you've got cable ties alongside screws for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch media included. You've got these screws for the OS tray and additional screws there to replace the ones in the casing. When I contacted U-NAS about reviewing one of their products, and again I was going through a lot of the Reddits and some of the SMB stuff and a lot of those sort of websites, a lot of the time people were talking about this being utilised as a SAS configuration, something you don't see a great deal of, so I asked them about it, and apparently they do provide, either you ask nicely enough or you pay about $40, you get SAS adapter plates to go inside to really take advantage of much faster connectivity in this 8-bay. Apart from that, you've got additional screws which are used for the installation of that ITX or ATX motherboard. And that's really it. If we have a little look inside, removing the foam. And again, there is a link in the description over on NAS Compared. We've done a full hardware review, all the photos of this device, a lot of close-ups, and some of the videos of the setup internally. We'll remove that from there. I will also add that although this has got that nice brushed metal sheen on the outside, it does arrive with a plastic cover which we reviewed we took off to take all of our photos for the review images. So again, if you want to see what that looked like, you can have a little look there. But there is our 8-bay chassis. Now you may have already noticed from our review, this thing picks up fingerprints pretty easy. Now it doesn't on the surrounding enclosure. This looks not dissimilar to enclosures I've seen from the likes of QNAP on their 8-bay series. Very similar indeed, at least in terms of framework and shape. But yes, I will say that front panel does pick up the old fingerprints very, very easily there. So if we remove a lot of those components from the table, those over there, we can have a look at this case. One thing I'm kind of sad not to see in this case, and again it measured at 315mm by 275mm by 197mm, so about average for an 8-bay casing, but a lot of users are going to be making a comparison between this and another popular 8-bay DIY NAS enclosure called the K7. And the K7 measures about 2 to 3 centimeters bigger in every other dimension, which on the face of it doesn't sound like much, but later on in this video you will hear why those 2 to 3 centimeters in certain dimensions do make a huge amount of impact. Now, I like the front layout there. I think I'm not overly fond on this tray design. I mentioned this in my 4-bay. I wish these were lockable, but they don't have to be. But again, the trays themselves are pretty high quality metal all the way through. We've got screw holes for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch media included. If we remove all of these trays, I'm pleased to confirm that the inside of this device also features SAS and SATA connectors by default internally. So again, whether it is you're going to go and spring the extra cash to get the SAS backplane adapter change, you can do that. But honestly, I think this will be fine as is for most users. And again, if you go down the SAS route and you're only using SAS hard drives, there are no inherent performance benefits, at least in terms of traditional throughput goes, between SAS and SATA hard drives in a configuration of this scale. But if we have a little look inside, we've got an absolute ton of surrounding ventilation all the way around that casing, and there at the back we've got ourselves all of those lovely connectors. And again, if you swap those out and you go for some of those SAS connectors, as you can see, they're both SAS SATA here as well as being SAS SATA in there anyway. So again, you're not going to need to spring for the adapter if you're going to use old SAS drives anyway. And of course that feeds into the SAS multi-lane there at the back, the mini HD SAS. Now, on the side here, you've got ventilation on this side, and that's going to be quite a significant fan later on, but we've got no ventilation on the top, and we have very sparse ventilation on that side panel. On the base, we have no further ventilation, but you may have noticed there, what we do have is 2 little USB ports there at the top, and those are USB 2 ports there that are combined into quite a substantial front panel in terms of cabling that I'll show you later on. But there's also your standard audio in and out. Also on that bottom corner you can see there is not only do we have our power button, which by the way lights up with an LED, as does each one of those trays, but you've also got an additional USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabits per second port, and a front mounted USB copy button. And again, your motherboard and support of the F panel, you know, compatibility aside, and your NAS OS aside, having a USB front mounted copy button is weirdly rare when it comes to DIY cases. And although I've seen it on the majority of U-NAS's enclosures alongside similar enclosures with different brand names on them, I will say that it's not as common as you might think. And for those that have followed this channel for a while, I have always been a fan of those. Now, if we have a little look more at that, I kind of wish this space had more going on. I get that in here is where our motherboard was going to be, but I do think possibly a support of an LCD panel that you can get funneled in to a lot of motherboards these days would have been quite nice. I think that's quite a wasted opportunity. I would have at the very least ventilated that or added a mesh ventilation panel there for a lot of that active airflow. But again, I've not put this through the rigors of an industrial cooling system, so maybe that would have been detrimental. Now, if we look at the rear, we've got these 2 fans here. These are Gielid 12mm fans, both of them silent fans rated. They say ultra quiet, but again, I've got no means to test it at this stage. We have got the slot here for that the back plane for our M-ATX or M-ATX board, and we've got the PCIe slots. This is something I'm going to have to talk about later on internally, because it's the thing I both love and hate about this device. And we've got that PSU then. As mentioned, if you spring the extra 90 to 100 quid on U-NAS's own website, you can pick up a 350 watt PSU to go in there. Now, the reason I raised the PSU more so than anything else in this case is because it uses those flex kind of rack mount style 1U slot PSUs rather than standard SFX power bricks. And I know they're space saving, and I know that's kind of this thing's gig, but I'm not overly keen on those. And this is going to be one of the 2 reasons I make that comparison against the K7 case, because the extra 2 or 3 centimeters it's giving you in different dimensions, and again, that can be broken down to the millimeter as well. they allow for little extras like that to step away from those slightly awkward PSUs there, which again are space saving, don't get me wrong, but at the same time aren't as more readily available to buy off the shelf and end up costing about 10 to 15% more than standard SFX or block PSUs there. But apart from that, that's at least they got the option of it there, and at least it's, you know, it's quite slickly fitting into that case there. And if we grab ourselves a screwdriver, we can take a good look inside. While I do that, I will highlight that we are doing a build using an M-ATX board and an ITX board coming very, very soon. And with that, on some other builds, it means we're going to have some components knocking around, which may well go into a follow-up video on this case, where we look at how a build goes in. Because when I looked at lots of reports online, there wasn't much, I would say, in the way of concerns about the case build itself, but one of the main concerns a lot of users had was physical space, with users installing M-ATX boards into this and just finding things just a wee bit snug. You find a lot of comments online about that, and it kind of makes sense. As I say, those 2 to 3 centimeters for me make a lot of difference here. If we get this external casing off the top, and again, much like the 4-bay, although this is metal, it's surprisingly thin. It just feels a little thinner than I was expecting there. You can see the ventilation there overall, but it just feels just a little thinner. Not like hugely detrimental, but still just a little bit. Now, if we have a little look inside, look at the first of our small fans. That's an 80mm fan there built underneath. Again, that's another Gilead silent fan there. Inside as well, we've got pre-attached Molexes there, which is surprisingly nice, given a lot of the time when you're looking at DIY cases and you get to the backplane module, when you get to the backplane, you're already getting a bit of a headache thinking about your angular SATA cables that are going in. But then also you've got to think about, are you going to be using SATA and or Molex? You need 1 or 2 Molex. Generally, you need 1 Molex for at least every 4 drives. And they kind of save you the trouble on that by not only pre-attaching them and cable tying them in, but giving you easier access to those Molexes straight out the back. And the same goes with this system also arriving, and look at this enormous bundle of cables here. This system also arrives with all of our SATA cables pre-attached as well, so we don't have to go out and get ourselves some SATA cables for attaching all of those individual 8 bays, because it arrives pre-attached. The same goes for a huge arrangement of F-panel connectors there, again, because of not only the front panel USB, but the one-touch copy button, the power button there for power and reset, then you've got the 2 additional USBs, then you've got the additional audio in and out. There's a lot for that F-panel, not including all of the LEDs, I might add, to be getting along with. So at least this system is arriving not only with the standard F-panel connectors, but also with the SATA and the Molex pre-attached, tied in. So you're going to save yourself a lot of time during that initial setup. And the same goes for those additional cables there at the base for those rear mounted fans there all the way along. But all of that said, alongside that PSU, I'm going to get onto my other gripe here, which is to do with card installation. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we're in the progress of building at the moment a different NAS system here. This is a 12th gen i9 M-ATX board here, so we'll move that out. Again, this is straight off your Aliexpress budget card there, and we will hit within our tight budget for our Jonsbo N3 video. And we've got most of the components for that build now. It's just a question of scheduling the build itself. If we get this card out of here, we've not even got the CPU fan attached to this yet. Remember that. We've only got that CPU, that i9 underneath that metal plate there. But we've got our PCIe here. And if we get that installed inside this case, and we're not going to screw it in, just to show you the alignment, because we've got the risers. If we hold that in place, you're able to see that that M-ATX is going to do absolutely fine in terms of spacing, right? And the M-ATX doesn't really expand out too much, only about here. But the real matter of debate here is to do with the placement of those PCIe slots. Because, if we move this around, sorry about the noise, this PCIe card is going to be in here like so. which means those PCIe's are going to need a riser because they're at the wrong angle for our x16 slot that this card arrives with. Now again, if we were using the M-ATX card, that would extend things even further along that alignment, giving us slightly less space. And with the card going deeper as well, we're going to start getting into where our cables are going to be. And remember, space-wise, we don't have what I would argue a huge amount of space to be getting on with inside this case. So I can see why a lot of users online are slightly concerned about that mass of cables there that are going to be spread across the top in a relatively small compact space. Now that also means that you're going to be limited probably to about 6mm height CPU fans. You're not going to be able to use aggressive CPU fans, which is one of the main reasons why we're not putting this card in this system, because this being a 12th gen i9, I'm going to want a serious CPU fan to live on top of that. And 6mm height ones, yes, you can get more compact, heavily copper based ones, and particularly low noise ones as well, but still nonetheless, we don't have a large height differential to play with there. And particularly once you factor in, you're going to need a riser in order to get your PCIe cards at this angle, because you do have a huge amount of space there to play with, which means pretty decent length cards are going to be possible inside this system without any worries. Although frankly, massive, performance led 8 NVMe cards unfortunately are not going to be possible here by, again, that matter of just a few centimeters in every dimension. The result is that we've got a system here that does look like it's patting a lot into that framework. And although it does support those ATX boards, which again, for its price point and for its scale, is still going to be very, very good, those M-ATX boards, it does seem like it's going to be something of a tight fit. And I know there are users online that have done builds for this, or if you head over to Part Picker, well, you'll find people that have used this, and when they've used those M-ATX boards, one of the main complaints people have is that cavity there for the cabling and how it's being filtered across the top of it. With the exception of that, I think it's a very well put together case. I think it's very well organised. I think the build quality is very, very good. I like the fact that they've stylised the front there to be nice and standardised in terms of nothing too out there, with our 3 low noise fans wrapped around it. But I'm just worried about the placement of M-ATX boards inside this system and where all of this cabling is going to live. Maybe we'll do a follow-up video to this when the ATX boards arrive, and then from there we'll see just how tight that cabling could have been. And just remember that when going for this, it's pretty much a given you're going to need a riser to go inside that panel there at the top. And with the case itself arriving on the market with all of these cables pre-included, I'm slightly surprised they didn't spring and include either, like a ZIF style cable riser or even an angular riser. When we look at, say, when QNAP have an 8-bay device like in this kind of framework, like their 72X series, what they use in their systems is they have a sister board that is connected a 90-degree angle to the motherboard, and that sister board either manages the storage, or that sister board allows them to have 2 PCIe slots at an angle, something that's not made possible here because of the support of the cards within that smaller frame. And if you are worried, again, there are cases out there, and from U-NAS themselves, that do increase the dimensions ever so slightly. If you're an ITX user, ignore most of what I said, because in case of an ITX, you've got a lot of room to play with inside this case. And for an ITX installation, not only can you use pretty aggressive cards, but you've got a lot more room to play with in terms of more inventive PCIe workarounds and mods within the case. But this has been our hardware case review of the NSC-810A. Again, we may do a follow-up on this case, but we will update the article below with even more images as the ATX card arrives and we start building more into this, at least for that article. And whether it's worth another video, we'll find out. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've got this case, or if you would consider it, if we got off or bad. Maybe you've had a positive experience, maybe you've had a negative. Let us know below. If you need some advice, need help with your own DIY setup, there's the free advice section over on NAS Compares, the big blue button on the right hand side of the screen, on NAS Compares pages, the Discord where you can talk to other NAS community members, the Ask NAS Compares forum,
or head over to Ko-Fi and Patreon for expedited support when needed, access to our monthly Zooms and seminars, content polls, and exclusive access to a lot of videos like this in advance. We've got the Silverstone case coming up very, very soon. That may already be live, and more on the Jonsbo. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.